sports have become, I mean, I think they've always been, you can always have had a political analysis of sports, but it feels like, and I don't think this is just exclusive to sports, I feel like it's the case across many different sectors of our society, but sports have become much more political over the past year, couple of years, in fact. Am I right?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen this pivot coming for quite a few years now in the world of sports. In 1995, the New York Times Magazine had a cover story called "Do Sports Even Matter Anymore?" And I don't think anybody would have a cover like that today. You've seen this pivot take place largely in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think we could point to a lot of reasons why that's the case. From the growth of social media, which allows athletes to express themselves directly to fans, to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and the centrality of black athletes in sports and their desire to connect with that movement. But I just think everything got ratcheted up to a whole nother level in 2016 when Colin Kaepernick started the protests against racial inequality and police violence during the anthem. And then in 2017, it got amped up to even another level when Donald Trump decided to make black athletes the face of his backlash and the faces of white supremacy, like really the symbolic faces of what it means to make America great again, is to put these people in their place, and using high-profile black athletes as a stand-in for his demagoguery and his agenda of trying to keep people divided, precisely so they could do things like pass tax bills that benefit the 1/10 of the 1% while screwing white and black people across this country.
I mean, let's because I want to talk about this from the perspective of athletes, but before we go there, I mean, why do you think why does Donald Trump, and he did this with Kaepernick, he did it with all the football players who took a knee. He ended up doing it with the father of one of the UCLA basketball players who I think it was UCLA who was freed from China. There may be others. If so, please tell us. But why do you think? I mean, why do you think he's doing that as opposed to, I don't know, other figures?
Well, because it's a very, very old playbook that he's reading from. And to go after a black athlete means going after somebody who has cultural capital, somebody who has a microphone, somebody who has a platform, somebody who has influence. And this old playbook is about also playing on people's, particularly white people's, resentment of these athletes. You know, looking at them and saying, hey, they have all this fame, they make this money, who are they to complain about anything? As if, first of all, many of them grew up in poor communities, and second of all, as if racism only affects you if you're poor, as if these athletes or their families don't actually have to deal with racism themselves, or don't have to deal with the fallout of having a white supremacist president. And so what you saw in 2016 and what you and I discussed a year ago was the way in which sports had put itself forward, not just at the professional level, but at the high school level as well, as sort of this hub of resistance to Trumpism. And if you were looking for a place where you would see resistance, you would see it on the athletic field, which is such an amazing cultural shift, because historically, when we've thought about sports, at least in recent history over the last several decades, we're talking about a very apolitical space, or a space that was used to promote things like militarism and hyper-nationalism after 9/11. That was the political use of sports. And you saw that shift dramatically in the last 2 years. So what it was, and what it's been, and what it continues to be, is a cultural front of resistance to Donald Trump. And so that made it something he wanted to attack. And it's a great way to attack the black community as a whole, while saying, you know, like, what? No, there's nothing racist about it. This is about defending patriotism and the anthem and all the rest of it, and they should be forced to stand or they should be fired. I'll tell you, one of the things that's really given the game away, though, is that if you ask me who in sports has been the most lacerating in their criticism of Donald Trump, at the top of the list, you'd have to talk about San Antonio Spurs coach Greg Popovich and Golden State Warriors coach Steve Kerr. They have two things in common, in addition to being great championship coaches. The two things they have in common are that that neither one of them has been responded to by Donald Trump. He's ignored both of them. And the other thing they have in common is that they are white. And so that, in so many respects, gives the game away, because you can't divide and demonize people in the same kind of way if you're going after respectable and highly respected middle-aged white men.
Right. I mean, and I, with Eminem, culturally.
Yeah, no response to Eminem either.
No response, but he'll go after
to Snoop Dogg.
Right. Yes. I mean, there's clearly a pattern here, and I wonder too if going after a black athlete, or for that matter, a black cultural icon or actor or musician, gives the added benefit of, yes, it's not about race, but it's almost like there's a populist twinge to it, right? Like this idea of,
sure.
Take your money. I think at one point he said, you get millions of dollars, go back and do your job type of thing. It's amazing that you could actually, on some level, you can take that construct and you could apply it to what Paul Ryan, frankly, is about to argue when it comes to, food stamps or whatever. This notion of like you are ingrates, you're lazy, and we know this is coded stuff that is coming from the Republicans. I mean, this is well established. But so what Donald Trump is doing is both demagoguery, but it's also it's just and I think we probably have said this in the past too. It's the dog whistle without the dog part. He's doing it through a megaphone on some level.
No, it's an ungrateful, as I think my friend Howard Bryant put it. He said ungrateful, who writes for ESPN, ungrateful is the new N-word. Right. And it's never something that is thrown at white athletes. And it's something that seems to be reserved exclusively for black athletes. And you're going to see it used against the black community more broadly, as they say, oh, you're not grateful for these amazing tax cuts we gave you. And and what you mentioned about food stamps. And just like that's a very old playbook that, goes back, certainly way earlier than Ronald Reagan. I mean, it goes back to opponents of the New Deal in the 1930s.
Right.
This attacking of the black athlete. I mean, it goes back to really the first prominent national black athlete, Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion. And this idea that, people in Congress attack Jack Johnson for the same reason that they're attacking Colin Kaepernick, even though the two men are actually very different. But it was because they chose to be free. They chose to be the kind of people who would say something, would speak out, and would not be constrained by the limits that this society put on them. We could apply that, of course, to everybody from Muhammad Ali to Billie Jean King, and there is a price to be paid for not staying in your box, particularly as an athlete, but most particularly if you choose to use that platform to say something. And I've been so impressed this year by the tenacity of these athletes in the face of Donald Trump's lizard brain to hold their ground. It's been a remarkable thing to see, and in many respects, they've won. I mean, Donald Trump attempted to use his sway with these billionaire owners to effectively eliminate their First Amendment rights and their union rights, because it's in their union contract that they don't have to stand for the anthem, and he failed to do that. He failed to do it. And additionally, after Donald Trump started attacking them, actually their popularity and the popularity of their message increased, according to polls. And the part about it that to me is most delicious and worth remembering right now is let's remember where he chose to create a platform to say something about these athletes, calling them sons of bitches and saying that they should be fired and forced. Do you remember where that was? That was Huntsville, Alabama. And Alabama, which Donald Trump country and all the rest of it, has now been really exposed. Donald Trump has 48% approval in Alabama. Doug Jones just won the Senate race there. And whatever else we want to say about that, it shows actually the weakness of Donald Trump, not his strength. And I'm sorry, just because we have a one-party government right now, and yeah, they could muscle through tax cuts for their donors. I mean, that's as depressing as that is, it really shouldn't surprise us. But whether you're talking about the unpopularity of this tax bill or Donald Trump's inability to successfully demagogue against these athletes, I mean, what it has exposed to me is his weakness, not his strength.
All right. Well, you know, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about that. I want to talk about some of the moments that stick out in your mind in 2017 as those moments of resistance. And I want to talk about if, in some ways, there was a nascent, more sort of a deeper politics that was growing that Donald Trump and sort of resistance to Donald Trump is some way sidelined. We'll talk about that when we return. I'm talking to the great Dave Zirin. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back.